For today's case, we're in the Emerald Isle, Ireland. A beautiful country with some of the most breathtaking scenery, fascinating history, and friendliest people you could meet. As we head back though to 2013, a search for a missing woman had been going on for a year. The searches and investigation had revealed no clues, and her family were left with no resolution, with the awful thought that maybe there would never be answers at the forefront of everyone's minds. But people do not just vanish into thin air. There is always an explanation, and it was that explanation that everyone was looking for. 36-year-old Elaine O'Hara was a childcare assistant and also worked at a newsagent's in Blackrock shopping centre part-time. She was extremely popular with both colleagues and customers, but life hadn't always been easy for Elaine. She had battled mental health problems and struggled with her self-esteem and self-worth since she was a teenager. She had had a few mental health crises over the years, and it was something she was always honest about. Whenever things became difficult or stressful, she would usually check herself into hospital. Colleagues at the shop knew about her mental health problems, and when she stretched her arms up one day to get something, it revealed her stomach was bandaged up. She assured her colleagues, though, it was nothing. She was very, very close to her dad Frank and spoke to him every day, seeing him 3 or 4 times a week. The 14th of July, 2012. Elaine had contacted the hospital saying she was having a mental health crisis, and she was admitted as a patient to be looked after. After a few weeks there, it was soon time for her to go home, and while she was excited, and the doctor said it was the best she had been, she said something to a nurse which did cause concern. The night before she was discharged, Elaine was upset. She told the nurse about a man who kept turning up at her home, and had a key to get in. The nurse said that if he was harassing her, she needed to tell the police. Elaine said she wouldn't, as the man had young children. She had also spoken to a colleague about being in a relationship with a married man who treated her very badly. On the 22nd of August 2012, Elaine was discharged. Her friend Jane spoke to her and described her as being in great form and excited to volunteer at a festival in Dublin. That day, Elaine had gone to her dad's for lunch, before going to Shangana Cemetery to lay flowers on her late mother's grave. They said their goodbyes at around 4 as she needed to be up early for the festival that following morning. Elaine's dad was becoming worried. She had failed to turn up to meet his partner to get a ride to the festival. Her dad went to her home. He saw that her iPhone had been left on charge, so he assumed that she had left in a hurry and forgotten to unplug it. As the hours ticked by and there was still nothing from his daughter, he sent the same joke text he would send to any of his children if he hadn't heard from them for a while. "Are you alive?" There was no reply. There was nothing but silence. The following morning he went back. Her phone was still there, and her car was still gone. He reported her as a missing person. Detective Garda Alton Sherlock knew where the search needed to start: Elaine's apartment. Would there be any clues in or around the property that could shed any light on where she had gone? There were a few things that stood out to him. There was a rope, there were chains, and there was a black latex suit. A quick look through her diary uncovered the name of a BDSM website. Her profile said, "Hi, I hate these things, as I think you never really know a person until you meet them. So, well, here it goes." As the days ticked by, the searches were not stopping. She had been wearing a blue zip-up top, navy tracksuit bottoms and white trainers. Her turquoise Fiat Punto was found. It was located on the 24th of August at 3 p.m. in Shangana Cemetery. A witness had seen a woman crying in the cemetery on the day she had last been seen. "I thought I heard somebody crying. I stopped. I saw a woman facing down on the grass. She was very upset and crying very loud. She said the woman had brown hair, but didn't see her face. It was something that had never left my mind," she said. The last confirmed sighting of Elaine was by a jogger in Shangana Park. She had asked him for directions to a bridge that went over the railway tracks. He was using an app to map out his run, and he was able to say he had seen her at 5:40 p.m. The jogger would then run past her as she was on the bridge and coming to a stop. There were bits and pieces of the story, but nothing was really adding up. and there was no clear evidence to suggest what had actually happened.
Finally, you're also looking for help in trying to track down a missing person. Yeah, Elaine O'Hara, she's been missing for just over a month now. She went missing on the 22nd of August. We have found Elaine's car, but it hasn't given us any clues as to Elaine's whereabouts at the moment. She's about 5'4". She's 36 years of age, and there's an excellent picture of her there on the screen.
The days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and before long, it had been almost a year since Elaine went missing. The 21st of August 2013. A woman had been out walking her dog around the foothills of the Dublin Mountains, something she did often on private land that she had access to, via a locked gate that she had keys for. She said she would walk on the track and the dogs would run in and out of the woods. One of her dogs found some bones. She thought these were probably that of an animal, so moved them out of the way of her dog and carried on walking. A few weeks later, on September the 13th, she was back walking her dogs in the same area. As she waited for one of the dogs to return, she heard her dog scratching at something. She walked past where she had left the bones that had been found in August and continued along the track. She came across more bones, tracksuit bottoms, and something inside that felt like a shoe. She found her dog, who had 2 big bones, and she was very concerned that these were human remains. She got in touch with Frank Doyle, the owner of the land, and she took him and another man to the area. They realised what they were now looking at: a jawbone. The police were called, and when the woman went back to the scene with them, she saw the blade of a knife stuck into the ground. The area was immediately sealed off. Then Frank explained that he had felt that something a bit funny was going on. He said he had been with a friend at some point between September 2011 and January 2012, when he had come across something extremely odd. He had gone into the woods and found string hanging off of the tree branches, a large plastic sheet, bits of plastic bags, a stick with nails protruding from it, and a jar of Vaseline.
Human skeletal remains were discovered here in a wooded area at Killikee Mountain near Rathfarnham in South Dublin on Friday evening by a woman out walking her dog.
Using dental records, they were able to confirm that these were the remains of Elaine O'Hara. Only 65% of her remains were found. Her skull and hands were not found. It could not be determined exactly how she had died. But this was now a major inquiry. Just 3 days before, and less than 20 miles away, purely by chance, another search had uncovered something very weird. On the 10th of September, a local angler had met with his brother and another man as they made their checks to make sure nobody was fishing illegally. As they looked down into the Vatry Reservoir, they spoke about how low the water was and how unusual it looked. Usually it would be between 15 and 20 feet of water, but on this day it was less than 20 inches. After the extremely hot summer. When looking again, they saw something sticking out of the water. Curiosity got the better of them, so one of the men stood on the wall with a hook on a rope and began retrieving the items: handcuffs, clothes, and a restraint, amongst other things. They were pulled out of the water and left on the wall. The next day, one of the men went back, deeply concerned that something was wrong. It had been on his mind all night. The items were still on the wall, so he decided to take them to Roundwood Garda Station at 1 p.m. The following day, Garda James O'Donoghue went out to look at the area the items had been found in. It was windy and nothing was obviously visible in the water. He went back on the 14th and got as close to the water as he could, but still couldn't see anything. 2 days later, with the weather now better, he went back again, and when he looked over the bridge into the Vatry Reservoir, he saw a pair of handcuffs in the water. The water was between 12 and 14 inches deep. He reached in and began to search. Then he pulled out a set of keys. These were Elaine's keys, and on one of the key rings was a store loyalty card. But that wasn't all he had found. He also discovered a knife, a chain with a ring, and an inhaler. When chasing the loyalty card up with the store, it was traced to Elaine. Another loyalty card was also Elaine's. He ran her name through the computer and discovered that she had been missing for over a year. He then found out that her remains had been found the day before, and were confirmed to be her that very morning. The area was cordoned off and the search continued, leading to more items being found, including a Nokia mobile phone. The underwater search teams found another Nokia, a dressing gown, 2 SIM cards, a pair of shorts, a rucksack, and a pair of glasses. The numbers on the glasses and the prescription lenses were traced to Elaine. The water levels of the reservoir had been extremely high the previous year, 2012, and the reservoir had often overflowed after a wet summer. Then the next year it was extremely warm, so the water levels became extremely low. The summer of 2013 was the driest since 1995. It was these conditions that had helped these items to be found. On the 21st of September, about 500 yards from where her remains were found, another search was conducted. They found tape, hacksaw blades, cable ties, shorts, trousers, and a shovel, amongst other things. The detectives believe that this may have been where she was brought by her killer, and she had been killed somewhere in that area. The phones that had been found had been underwater for over a year. Was there any chance police would be able to find anything on them? They had to try, and a forensic search of them began. Amazingly, they did work. Not only did they work, but they revealed hundreds of messages that detailed not only the last week of her life, but a relationship she was having. Each phone had the other number saved in it. One was saved as MSTR, and the other as SLV, master and slave. The roughly 250 text messages showed that the person she had been talking to had spoken about violent sexual fantasies and an urge to rape, stab and murder a woman. "I'll stab you next year." "Not if I get my way," she replied. "You don't get your way. What if only one? It will set my recovery back. You need to understand it's something I want. I'm sorry, sir. I will miss you." There were 2 phones that she had been in contact with. One ended in 086, which was the master phone, and the other ended in 083, which was a pay-as-you-go phone. The 083 phone was never found. On the 17th of August 2012, a text from this person she had been talking to said, "Did a huge walk up to the Dublin mountains the other day. Very lonely hill walkers up there. Just to find a route back with no cameras and I'm sorted." She had been found in the foothills of the Dublin mountains. On the day of her disappearance, she had allegedly said, "Please don't mention killing for a while. Just until I settle back in life, sir." But who was this person? Analysis of the phones and various cell towers they had pinged off of meant investigators began checking toll records from around Ireland. They knew that they were looking for a car that was registered to a man who worked in central Dublin and lived in the south of the capital. They knew that the phones had been used in South Dublin and Baggot Street in the city centre, and they also knew that this person had made references to flying. Detective Sergeant Peter Wood said, "There were 2 messages about flying. One said, was up flying at the weekend, skeleton ribcage where the knife went in, want to do a woman next." That was in reference to a sheep he had stabbed. There was a second message in early June 2011, "Terrible weekend, 15% pay cut and came 5th into flying. So we had looked at pilots." Then a suggestion was made. What if it wasn't a pilot they were looking for, but instead someone who flew model planes? They checked the Aeronautical Society of Ireland's website and the competition from the 11th of June, and right in front of them were the rankings. The man who had came 5th was there. It was a name that Elaine had written in her diary. They checked the Garda Pulse computer system and saw that he had reported 2 bikes stolen from a business on Baggot Street. It was finally starting to fall into place. We looked it up, it's an architect company. There was something in the back of our mind that one of Elaine's friends had said. She was in a violent relationship with an architect. Everything began to fit at that point. I think it was Jesus. We have him. The 17th of October 2013, 7 a.m. A man was taken into custody. 41-year-old married father of 3 Graham Dwyer was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Elaine O'Hara. A massive search of his home was conducted and several items were seized. Over the next 24 hours, he was interviewed 5 times. He was sure he had nothing to do with this. I know what you're getting at, but I didn't kill anybody. I'm worried about my wife and job. I'm worried about being associated with this case. I will say nothing about this case. I have nothing to do with it. I want to go home. Despite his protestations, they knew that he did know Elaine O'Hara. 2 detectives had taken items from the bins at Graham's family home, and the DNA from a container of car wax was matched to a profile found on Elaine's mattress that had puncture holes and bloodstains. Detective Sergeant Peter Woods, who was there for the interviews, said that Graham assumed the officers were stupid. You could see during the interview, Dwyer is the type of fellow that if you fed into his ego, he would talk to you. So then we start talking about his life, and we talk about where he works, the fact he's an architect. All these tiny things are important. We talk about his family life, we talk about flying competitions. Each time, bang, we're putting him in the location where the phone is. With the pay-as-you-go phone ending in 083, Graham had used a fake name to register it by doing a variation on a name of one of his acquaintances. He had registered it at what he thought was his sister's address, and had the alternative contact number be his real number, changing only 1 digit. The master phone, the 086 number, had moved around with him at the same time as Graham's vehicle. Over 200 days' worth of CCTV from Elaine's apartment building were trawled through. Then they saw something. On the 23rd of June 2012, Elaine had got home at 6:54 p.m, and 10 minutes later a man had come into the building. What was weird was he had covered his hand as he pressed the button for the lift, and kept his back to the camera. He was then seen leaving at 8:18 p.m. 1 week before Elaine was last seen, the man was seen entering with a rucksack that was similar to the one that had been found in the reservoir. Graham was asked if he could remember where he had been on the 22nd of August 2012, the day of Elaine's disappearance. He said he couldn't. He was shown CCTV stills of Elaine with a man at her apartment building. The officers said they believed that this man was him. "I'm glad I'm not murdering anyone in any of those photographs. I didn't kill anyone," he said. He would later admit that he had had a sexual relationship with her as part of a BDSM relationship. He was the dominant and she was the submissive. Why was his DNA found in her apartment? "I can understand how you found it, but I didn't kill anybody. I wouldn't be surprised if you found my hair or fingerprints there." At one stage, she asked me to kill her. The officers put to him that he had left her body in that location so he could go back to it. He said that was a disgusting accusation. The Computer Crime Investigation Unit's work would be key to finally getting the pieces of this complex puzzle to fit, and the 2 phones would be central to the case against him. They painted a dark and disturbing portrait. Elaine and Graham had known each other for several years. It was a relationship that had been pieced together by digital footprints and painstaking police work. In an email from one of Elaine's old computers, the sender had said they were willing to do what they had promised, irrespective of consequence. This email had come from someone using a profile on an adult site, the username being Architect72. There were profiles found on one of Elaine's old computers for an adult site in 2006, using the name Submissive391. This profile had viewed another profile, Architect77, 4 times in 2007. The email for Architect72 was linked to the email address Fetish Boy. One email sent by Fetish Boy on the 19th of September 2008 read, "I hope you're keeping okay. Assumed you're trying to get better and trying to stay away from what we do together. I completely understand. You should know I am always thinking of you and hoping you are safe and not suffering too much on the inside. Anytime you want, I will gladly carry out what I promised I would do, regardless of the consequences. You can call me from a phone box, even if it's months away or years. I'm always waiting. Get in touch anytime for a chat, or for the simple harmless things you like to do. Take care. Kiss, Sir." There had been more than 2,500 messages sent back and forth over the course of about 18 months, but Graham said neither of those phones belonged to him. The texts had the same themes running throughout. Elaine was asked to find someone for him to stab, and he wanted her to let him stab her. It appears their relationship ended in 2009 but started up again on the 25th of March 2011, after Graham got back in touch with her. "Hi Elaine, hope you're keeping well. Who is this please?" was the reply. From that day to the 11th of April their communication was reignited. but the messages included the following. I want to stick my knife in flesh while I am sexually aroused. I would like to stab a girl to death sometime. My urge to rape, stab or kill is huge. You have to help me control or satisfy it. The 28th of March 2011, Elaine asked, any news on baby? Referencing Graham's heavily pregnant wife. Not yet, has to happen this week, any time now. When are you free next? The following day she said, you still on? Wife not in labour or anything? He replies, so far so good. Got fake knives. Lucky me, she said. Lucky you if I don't use the other one. The 30th of March 2011, went well today, sir. I take it you are now a daddy again. Thanks for last night, sir. Really needed it. The following day he responded, yes, beautiful baby girl. Glad you enjoyed the other night. Many more sessions to come. See you sometime over the weekend. Also in March of 2011, Elaine had met a man called Robert through an adult dating site, and later reported being pregnant, but she would sadly lose the baby. These were terrible things Graham was being accused of, and the graphic messages were disturbing to say the least. But who was Graham Dwyer? Graham had been born in September 1972 and was described as easygoing and well-liked. He had a seemingly normal childhood and teenage years, spent being in the Scouts, working weekends and joining a band as a bass player. He went on to study architecture at the Dublin Institute of Technology, and around this time he also fathered a son with his then girlfriend. In 1997 he met a woman named Gemma and the pair started dating. They would later marry and begin a renovation project which would be featured in the Irish Times. His work as an architect also saw him featured on the television programme Beyond the Hall Door.
So the natural light coming around the mirror lights you to give it an even image. Most mirrors are top lit and create a shadow under your chin.
He was tech savvy, he loved cars and flying model aeroplanes. The mother of the son he had fathered in the 90s did say that he had discussed fantasies with her during the course of their relationship. Graham had allegedly told her that he had fantasised about stabbing a woman during sex. He had also brought a knife into the bedroom and would act out stabbing her without actually doing it. She had been shown the footage taken from Elaine's apartment block and was able to identify the man as Graham. When he was told about this in his police interview, Graham said it was nonsense. Oh my God, I'd say she enjoyed reading that. She wants to hurt me. On the 21st of August, just a few days before Elaine's disappearance, she had sent a message to the 083 number saying that while she was excited to be out of hospital soon, she was worried that she was going to struggle to cope. The reply? If it doesn't work out this time, the way out is through me. That day, a Buck Special hunting knife was delivered to Graham's office. He had asked for it to be marked up as private and confidential. Elaine had last been seen on the day she was discharged from hospital, and Graham had been in touch that day too. Graham told her she would be punished for going to hospital. He said her punishment was going to be big, and told her to leave her phone at home and drive to Shangana Park, where she was to park her car, walk over the bridge, go towards the shore and wait there. You have a big punishment coming up. Getting knifed in the guts. You will be well bound and gagged, tied to a tree deep in the forest. I have a spot picked out. We'll go to the woods, I'll take off your clothes, stab you, bury you, leave your clothes in your car by the sea, and it looks like you drowned. Shangana Park is large, and Elaine began walking to try and find the bridge she had directed her to. That was when she had asked the jogger for directions. On the day Elaine went missing, his work phone pinged off of a cell phone tower in Dublin at 4:55 p.m. It wasn't until several hours later, at 8:59 p.m, that it pinged off of a tower in the Foxrock area. It is believed it was switched off during these hours. He was using the master phone to contact her. The 18th of October 2013. Graham Dwyer was charged with the murder of Elaine O'Hara. He appealed to the Supreme Court for him to be granted bail, but he was unsuccessful. As Graham had entered a plea of not guilty, and this gruesome case had been in the intense spotlight of the media, his trial was going to be a highly charged and emotional one. Graham would not give evidence, however. Those in attendance were warned by the judge that this would be a difficult and confronting trial, and to be prepared to see graphic and disturbing evidence. Graham Dwyer's defence was simple. There was nothing to link him to her death. There was no evidence of stab wounds on her skeleton, and she could have taken her own life. The claim that she had been responsible for her own death was shot down by the prosecution. If this was the case, why had her clothes, keys, and other belongings been found miles away in the reservoir? The prosecution said Elaine's mental health problems made her a more attractive victim, as her death could be more easily put down to that, and not murder. The defence argued that documents that had been found on a hard drive in Graham's property, documents that talked about the rape and murder of a woman in graphic detail, were nothing more than fantasy. The prosecution said that this was someone who had the most extraordinary and disgusting fantasies, and who went about making them real. Graphic videos were also found on his computer, which showed him stabbing women during sex, including Elaine, who could be heard screaming in the footage. At the end of the video, he said, "Now that wasn't bad, was it?" The police were trying to track the other women in the videos down. They were blindfolded, so did not know they were being filmed. Another person to testify was a woman from the United States called Darcy. She had met Graham online, and he had said that he would kill her if she wanted to end her life. For the prosecution, this was about presenting a pattern of behaviour. In June 2011, he had asked Elaine to look at properties that were remote and needed to be renovated, with the aim of finding a young female auctioneer to prey on. It was also suggested to Elaine that a drunk girl on her way back from a night out, a homeless person or a sex worker were also possible targets. Another woman on the list was someone who worked opposite his office. His threats of violence had become more and more extreme, and he was deeply manipulative. The prosecution said that the phones were like Graham's shadow. He couldn't hide from what they showed. He had allegedly sent a message to her about stabbing a dead sheep, one to do a woman next. It was a fantastic feeling. So happy. Another message read, "It's a tough choice, either you let me stab you, or help me do it to someone else." He said he would wait to do it until we have the perfect plan. She replied, "You know there's no such thing as a perfect plan." He said lots of people have stabbed and got away with it. "Why not me? I can put you to sleep," he said. "Stop," she replied. "I know you want it. 30 seconds to slip into oblivion. Please, I have to think and decide. Please stop," she said. The messages were devastating for her family. This was something that had only been escalating. The injuries that her colleague had seen in the shop on her stomach when she reached up to a shelf were injuries that Graham had allegedly inflicted around 2008. The prosecution said that these messages showed a deep-seated, passionately held, irrepressible desire on the part of Graham Dwyer to get sexual gratification by stabbing. At one point she did try to end things, saying she wanted to become a mother. He said he would father a child if she found him a victim. "A life for a life," he said. She said no, so he offered her money, and she said no again. He then became verbally abusive and said that she would never find anyone. Her father told the court she disclosed information to me in early 2008. She was in my house one morning and we had an argument, maybe about money. She was poor at having money. And she said, "I'm seeing someone, a professional." I said, "Is he married?" And she said, "Yes." Her father choked back tears as he said Elaine had told him she was being tied up by this man for sexual gratification. The man she was seeing was an architect. Another person who testified was Graham's wife, Gemma. She had had no idea about this side of his personality, and she was extremely distressed and upset. The shovel that had been found was said by Graham's wife to have gone missing from the family garden, after seeing the paint splatter on it from when they had painted their fence. But a forensic scientist later said that the paint was not a match. Gemma explained on the day Elaine had been found, she and her husband had been out for dinner in Dublin. She was sure of the date. It was both of their birthdays. Nothing appeared to be wrong with Graham at all. 4 months after Elaine had gone missing, he had even been to a taping of The Late Late Show, and a picture was taken showing him in the audience. On the 39th day of the trial, as it was nearing its end, Justice Tony Hunt explained that he would not be granting an application by the defence team regarding some bits of evidence that had been presented by the prosecution. He said it was obvious that not only did Graham know Elaine well and had a sexual relationship with her, but also that he was the person using the number that ended in 083. He referenced the identical bag that had been seen from Elaine's apartment, which had then been fished out of the reservoir. The silence of the master phone after she had gone missing was also spoken about. The judge said that Graham had been inundating Elaine with messages about his fantasies, which were described as coming from a particularly sick mind. He said that the evidence that had been presented showed aspects of his behaviour that were relevant and disturbing. With the defence argument that this could have been a case of Elaine taking her own life, the judge said that all of her medication was found intact, and there had been no mention to her doctors or pharmacist of anything like that. These comments by the judge were not made in front of the jury. The trial would last for 43 days and 194 witnesses were called to give evidence. In a closing statement lasting 3 hours, the prosecution said that Graham had the intent and desire to murder Elaine O'Hara, and how this crime had reflected, almost point for point, the plan he had allegedly created. Elaine had been vulnerable and at a low point, and this had been exploited, with him using her low self-esteem against her. All Elaine wanted was not to be stabbed, not to be beaten, the prosecution said. She wanted nothing other than companionship, love, and ultimately a child. This was a case that had fascinated and appalled Ireland, and when it was time for the jury to deliberate, the judge told them, leave all the sentiment and emotion out of their decision. The jury would deliberate for 7.5 hours, and the unanimous verdict was then in.
We have to go to the Central Criminal Court and to Fergal Keane, because the jury is back in the Graham Dwyer case. Fergal?
I can tell you that Graham Dwyer has been found guilty by unanimous verdict of the murder of Elaine O'Hara.
Graham Dwyer appeared to be surprised by the verdict. He closed his eyes and shook his head. The judge thanked the jury for their service and said that they had had to sit through horrendous evidence, and added that he agreed with their decision 110%. He said he would not normally give his opinion on a verdict, but he completely endorsed the verdict they had reached. The judge also showed enormous empathy for Graham's wife Gemma, saying she was most cruelly deceived by him. We may be thankful that a dangerous man is now out of the way, he said, adding that he had shown no remorse, and his sentence was richly deserved. Graham Dwyer was given the mandatory sentence of life in prison. After the sentencing, his wife Gemma said that her thoughts and condolences are with the O'Hara family for the grief and pain they are suffering. Following his conviction, detectives were looking into other unsolved murders, including Raynard Murray, who was stabbed to death aged 17 after a night out with friends. It was a case that had been referenced in the messages between Graham and Elaine, but no further developments are available about that, and her case remains unsolved. Detective Sergeant Peter Wood said although they found no such video, he believed Graham filmed the murder. If you look at the messages, he talks about send me pictures of the stab wounds, based on the evidence they had found on his computer, and the sorts of things that he found satisfaction in. He said he had no doubt that he filmed it. He also said that he had no doubt if Graham had not been caught, he would have built up to kill again. I don't actually believe he killed before, I don't believe that, but that's my personal opinion. What informs me is the text messages. I want to do a woman next, and it builds up from there. I know a bit about sexual offenders and what happens, and sexual offenders tend to build up to an offence. Then they commit the offence, and then they stop for a while. And when they stop for a while, the urges build up in them again. I have no doubt that if he wasn't caught, he would have built up to murder somebody again. And bear in mind that on the morning he was arrested, he'd been looking at some serious stuff on his phone the night before. Really gruesome stuff. It also emerged that in 2011, Graham had contacted a woman randomly on Facebook. He had offered to help her build a house on a remote piece of land. She said he came down every weekend on the train to visit the site. There was a big hole dug in 2010 for percolation. Graham had access and went to the site several times by himself. It was both remote and isolated. It just struck me as unusual the way he was so keen to help. I offered payment and he said he would only take money once the planning went through. The planning application was turned down and the woman and her family moved away. When I heard he'd been arrested, and what for, I just thought, thank God I'm not buried up there. I would have been up there some summer evenings late with him. It makes my blood run cold. It was so remote nobody would ever hear a thing. He would often come down on the train and go up on his own taking loads of photographs. Then it came out in court that he'd been checking isolated sites. Thank God we didn't go any further with it. Detective Sergeant Peter Woods would also recall a joke that Graham had made whilst he was in court trying to get bail. He said he had met him in the Supreme Court, and at this point had been in custody for several months. He thought he was going to get out, but he was appealing the High Court's decision to refuse him bail. It's the one time where you interact with them, because in the courts you all just sit together. He said to me, "How are you, Peter? How's it going?" I said, "Grand." "How are you getting on in prison?" "Grand," he says. "They had me working in the kitchen. I didn't think they'd give me access to knives so quickly." Graham Dwyer would later launch an appeal against his sentence in relation to the phone data that had been gathered in the inquiry.
An opinion published by an advisor to Europe's top court has strengthened the case taken by convicted murderer Graham Dwyer over the retention and accessing of his mobile phone data. If the judgment of the Court of Justice of the EU follows the same lines as the opinion, it could have significant implications for the investigation of serious crime across Europe.
Graham Dwyer was convicted in 2015 of the murder of Elaine O'Hara in August 2012. Mobile phone metadata showing where his phone was and who he was in contact with played an important part. But the data was retained and accessed under Irish legislation brought in following an EU directive, later found to be invalid. In 2018, the High Court found the legislation breached EU law. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court referred the issues to the Court of Justice of the EU for clarification. At a hearing in Luxembourg in September, the state argued the ability of law enforcement agencies to use retained data was essential to upholding the rule of law. The Irish position was supported by 13 other member states. Dwyer's lawyers argued the Irish legislation was extreme. The advice of an Advocate General published today is non-binding, but will inform the court's judgment. In his opinion, the Spanish Advocate General said the general and indiscriminate retention of telecommunications data was justified only by the protection of national security, and this did not include the prosecution of serious offences. He said the Irish legislation allowing it to be retained for 2 years and accessed without independent oversight did not comply with EU law. After the judgment is issued, the matter will go back to the Supreme Court to make a final decision on the case, taking account of the European Court's binding ruling.
Orla, what is this all likely to mean for Graham Dwyer's appeal?
Well, almost 7 years on from his conviction, Katrina, Graham Dwyer's appeal has still not been heard, and lawyers are obviously waiting for the final outcome in these proceedings. Now, if the Advocate General's opinion is endorsed by the full judgment of the court, it will bolster his appeal, and it's certainly likely then that the Supreme Court will rule in his favour and uphold the previous High Court judgment in his favour. But that's not the end of the matter. His case then has to go to the Court of Appeal. And the Court of Appeal will then look at the grounds of appeal. It will hear arguments from both sides before it makes its decision. And it will make a decision about whether or not the mobile phone metadata should have been admitted as evidence in Dwyer's original trial in 2015. And also what impact that will have on his conviction, if any. Because obviously while the mobile phone metadata was important, it wasn't the only evidence in the trial. And it wasn't the only circumstantial evidence considered by the jury at the trial. So there is a long way to go yet. And a favourable decision for Graham Dwyer in the Court of Justice of the EU does not necessarily mean that he'll be successful in overturning his conviction.
The family of Elaine O'Hara have said they hope she can now rest in peace following the dismissal of her murderer's last-ditch Supreme Court appeal against his conviction. The court unanimously ruled that the evidence of mobile phone metadata was admissible in Graham Dwyer's trial in 2015. He will now continue to serve a life sentence for murder.
Dwyer challenged the admissibility of mobile phone data evidence at his trial, evidence which helped to link him to Elaine and her murder. The Court of Justice of the European Union and the Supreme Court found the legislation under which the evidence was retained and accessed breached EU law. But that win didn't help Dwyer to overturn his conviction. And this morning, the legal proceedings ended with the Supreme Court's definitive dismissal of his appeal.
I note that there was substantial evidence linking Mr. Dwyer to Ms. O'Hara in various ways. The cornerstone of the prosecution case was the content and timing of the text messages which on the prosecution case were sent by Mr. Dwyer to Ms. O'Hara, as well as the messages sent by her. On the prosecution case, once those messages were attributed to Mr. Dwyer, it was inevitable that the jury would convict. The attribution of those messages to Mr. Dwyer was therefore an essential building block of the prosecution case. In my judgment, I analysed the evidence linking Mr. Dwyer to the phones from which those messages had been sent, the so-called green phone and master phone, as well as the evidence linking Ms. O'Hara to the phone not registered to her, the so-called slave phone. That evidence had not been challenged nor contradicted. Thus, even without the disputed traffic and location data relating to Mr. Dwyer's work phone, the remaining evidence in my view, available to the prosecution was more than sufficient to establish attribution beyond any reasonable doubt. The evidence was in fact overwhelming and unanswerable. There is therefore no question of any lost chance of acquittal in this case. Therefore, even if the traffic and location data relating to Mr. Dwyer's work phone had been found to be inadmissible, I would have upheld the decision of the Court of Appeal to apply the proviso and would have dismissed the appeal on that basis. I would therefore dismiss the appeal.
Accordingly, the order of the court will be that the appeal will be dismissed.
All rise. Legal sources do not believe Dwyer has any further realistic options open to him to challenge his conviction. He'll now continue to serve the life sentence imposed on him more than 9 years ago.
Elaine O'Hara was a trusting, vulnerable woman. And it must be made clear, this is not about BDSM. This is about the deliberate abuse of trust and power. Healthy BDSM relationships are grounded in communication, consent and mutual respect, all of which were absent in Elaine's case. It is all too easy and frankly lazy to sensationalise stories like this by painting BDSM itself as the problem, but this not only misrepresents an entire community, it detracts from the real issue. This is about a man who exploited Elaine's vulnerability and pushed far beyond the limits of consent. What happened to her wasn't about preference or lifestyle, it was about manipulation, control, and a complete disregard for her autonomy. It was about a man who saw an opportunity to dominate and abuse someone and use her to satisfy his own ends. For Elaine's family, the trauma and pain is something that will never go away. It was heartbreaking for us to listen to the texts Elaine received from a depraved and diseased mind. The manipulation of her vulnerability was apparent, and when she tried to resist, she was reined back in. We can hear her voice in those texts, just wanting to be loved. Hearing the contents of those videos will haunt us forever. This is our life sentence. For us, there is no parole. For those of you that like to listen on the go, we now have our episodes in podcast form, and you can now find this via the link in our description box or by searching Truly Criminal Podcast on your podcasting platforms.